Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph in Yevmot. Look for a fushling for Nomi Rivka Bastina Shoshana for Yom Tov Lippman Ben Dvor Fegachaya for Shlomo ben Rachel Yosef Asriel ben Chaim Michal and Elazar ben Reuma. Yesterday we got down to, let's see, about 10 lines down on the page. Amarava. Remez l'shniyas min haTorah. Remember, the main shniya that we think about is your grandmother. The Torah does not prohibit you marrying or sleeping with your grandmother. Of course, you can't do it with your mother, but that doesn't prohibit. Obviously, we would consider that, meguchach, disgusting, to do that. But that's one of the things that the rabbis prohibited. They're called shniyas, the secondary ones, and there are many others as we're going to learn today. But what's the idea, Ramaz? What's the hint of shniyas min haTorah? Even though the Torah doesn't specifically forbid these relationships, but there's a hint in it. B'nayin shnemar ki eskol tavos ha'el asu anshei ha'aretz asu anshei ha'aretz. In other words, after describing the arayas, the various forbidden relationships in the Torah, it says all these abominations, the people of the land, and as the people of Eretz Canaan that you are inhabiting, that you are taking over, you're conquering, they have done these. As Tovos Ha'el, these. Ha'el is considered strong. Ha'el kashos. These are very stringent, very difficult, tough averos that they have done. And Mechlal the Ikarakos. In other words, it says these are the real bad ones. Don't live with your brother, with your sister-in-law, and your mother-in-law, and all these other ones that you're not allowed to, that the Torah specifically forbids. These are the tough ones. Mashma, there are also less stringent ones, like your grandmother, and as we'll see, your daughter-in-law, your son-in-law's, your son's daughter-in-law, many other things. The Torah forbids, for example, you can't sleep with your daughter-in-law. If your son dies or divorces his wife, you can't marry his daughter-in-law. What about his sons, your grandson's daughter-in-law? So those are all added on. They're less stringent. So since the Torah says ha'el, the tough ones, the strong ones, kashos machlal di'ikarak. So mine, what are they? Shniyas. My mashma da'el lishna the kash. How do we know el means tough? Ha'el simply means these. It's like a shortened version of ha'ela. How do we know it means these stringent ones, these difficult ones? Lishna the kash. It says v'es elei ha'aretz lakach. Nebuchadnezzar took the strong ones, the mighty ones from the land. He exiled them. So el is a lashon of strong. This disagrees with Rav Levi. If a person cheats on measures, the guy that tips the scale at the he weighs down the fruits with water, etc., and he cheats you. How do you know that that's one of the punishment for that is more difficult? Yosef mentioned it's more difficult than for sexual impropriety, for sexual misconduct. How do you know? Shazen nemar b'ayin el, v'zen nemar eila. In other words, here it says by Arias, it says el, which is tough. V'zen nemar b'eila. Eila, there it talks about when it comes to midos, when you cheat on weights and measures, that's Eila, which is even stronger. So Mashma El is not so strong. You just said that Kies Tovos El, these are the stringent ones, and therefore there must be lighter ones. Those are the Shniyas. El is not so strong. Rav Levi apparently says El is not so strong because midos is worse. If you cheat on midos, it's worse than cheating with sexual misconduct, because the sexual misconduct says El, and when it comes to midos, it says Eila. The answer is no. El kosher, Eila kosher el. They're both difficult. They're both stringent, but El is strong and stringent, and El is even more than that. Says more B'gavi Arais Namiaks of Eila. What do you mean by Arais? It only says El, and by midos it says Eila. Both of them being strong, but Eila is strong. By Arais it also says Eila. It says at the end of the parsha of Arais, it also says Eila over there. Rashi points out Ksevela B'Ktova Eila Minechrasu. So there it says Eila there too by Arias. It doesn't just say El, it says Eila. That's to tell you, for these two avos, for these sexual misconduct abominations, then you will get chorus. But for midos, even though it's very stringent, but you don't get chorus for that. So why are they stringent? Why is it so stringent? Why do you say that to cheat on weights and measures? That's very stringent. It's not as stringent apparently. You say it's more stringent than Arias because by Arias it says El and here it says Eila. But the punishment for Arias is much worse. If you committed sexual misconduct you could still do tshuva as long as you haven't created a mamzer yet, which cannot be retracted. There's no way to get back from mamzer, as we've been discussing. But you can leave a bad relationship. A Kohen's married to a grusha, he could do tshuva and leave her, or married to a non-Jewish, whatever it was, you could leave. You could do tshuva on that. But you can't do tshuva on weights and measures, because when you cheat with weights and measures, you're cheating the whole public. And even though Rashi says what they do is, what you should do is they give tzedakah to the public, but that's not a good tshuva. You didn't really make up for having cheated all these individual people. So that was one source. The source was ale is stringent. It's mashma that they're lighter ones. That's the shnias. Rav Yehuda says this. The hint of shnias in the Torah is mehacha. It says in Koheles Izain v'chiker that Shlomo HaMelech balanced and searched and he investigated. Tikkun Mishlam Arba, he made many proverbs. In other words, he instituted many halachas. Before Shlomo HaMelech came, Hoisa Torah Domelech Fifa. Like the Torah was like a basket she'ein lo znaim, that had no handles. Till Shlomo came, also lo znaim, he made handles. In other words, he made handles. He made extra stringencies to keep you from messing things up. That's the idea that of Takanos B'Devrei Sofrim. Israel Divrei Sofrim. He says, Yoser Mehema B'ni Zohar. More than this, be careful. Yizar B'Divrei Sofrim, Yoser B'Divrei Torah. In other words, he told us to say, Shlomo hinted, and when Shlomo said he did many investigations, made many proverbs, he said, what did he say there? Be careful, listen to the rabbis. The rabbis added more than's written in the Torah. Listen to the rabbis to keep you from doing these things. In other words, when we said, I give you the prime example is your grandmother. But as we'll see, there are many other cases which are hard to understand. Why does the Torah say why did the rabbi say don't sleep with your grandmother? The Torah prohibits it. The Torah prohibits you to sleep with your grandmother. Why did the rabbis prohibit it? Because you might come sleep with your mother. Now, all the Xeris Rabbanan are so you shouldn't come to do a Doraisa. Rashi says the source, the hint at Shnias in the Torah, even though it's not the favorites, is from this pasuk. It says, Para'eu, pasuk in Mishlei, Para'eu, Rashi says it means big, make it big, make the Isra big. Think of it as, that's a terrible, terrible thing. Al Tabakal, don't pass by it. In other words, stay away from it. Satemi Allah, turn away from it, Bavor, and pass. Stay away from this big, terrible thing. Amar Rashi, Mashal Ravoshi's example, I'll give you an example of what Ravosha means. Stay away from it. A lot of Mishamar Pardas, a person's guarding a orchard. Mishamar Mechutz, if you guard it on the outside, you stay on the outside, and you could see in all directions. Kula Mishamar, the whole orchard is protected, is all guarded. But let's say you're inside. If you're inside, you can't see the back because you're already inside. So what's in front of you is guarded. But what's behind you, you can't see. If you're outside, you can see everything. If you're inside, you can't see it. But this is a bad example, says the Gemara, because in the example you gave, at least if you're inside, at least what's in front of you is guarded. Here's exactly what I said before. If there wouldn't be the secondary prohibitions that the rabbis added on, you might come to live with an erva as well. That's the idea. So, example, the grandmother is a tough example, but let's say, as we'll see, your son's daughter-in-law. Okay, you can't sleep with your own daughter-in-law. That's what the Torah prohibits. When I say sleep means forever, meaning even if your son's dead or divorced, whatever, you can't sleep. What about your son? That's an additional one. So why do they add your son's daughter-in-law, meaning your grandson's wife? Why? Because you shouldn't come to do the Esrei Torah, which is your daughter-in-law. Rav Kana says a pasuk in the Chumash. It says, "Ushmartem esmashmi." You should guard my guard, right? Or my my shift, whatever. Guard my guarding. Guard my safeguard. Why? Also, make an extra guard. Notice the Torah prohibits one thing. You should make a guard around that. Amalei Abayil of Yosef. That's the Raisa. We just said that Shnias, these rabbis added on all these secondary sexual prohibitions, right? They added on secondary ones to keep you from doing the real base of the Torah. What's the hint of that? So there's a hint in Yecheskel, we have a hint at it. These mashma that there's other ones. A pasuk in Koheles Mishlei. If he says ushmartem is ushmarti, you should guard my guarding. In other words, the Torah is telling you to add extra guards, almost befavorish. Some of the rabbis hadaraisi. It's the Raisa of Pirush Rabbanan. The rabbis explained it. That's why we attribute Shnias to Rabbanan. So it's more Kol Torah Nami, Pirush Rabbanan. Everything in the Torah, the rabbis explain what it is, right? You got to pay, the classic example is, that an eye for an eye. The Torah says you have to pay back. What does it mean? Money. So the rabbis explain what the Torah means, but it's Minat Torah. When it says over here, it means this. It's really the halachas of Shnias and Rabbanan, but they supported it by the pasuk Ushmarta Mishmar Shmarti. We supported it based on that pasuk. That pasuk hints at it, and therefore they have what to rely on. That's called an asmach. That's really halachas Rabbanan, but they added it on. What are all these secondary things? So there's many. This brisa, we have a brisa here which is going to list 8 of them. Tan Rabbanan. Manishus, what are these secondary sexual prohibitions? Aim imo, as I said, your mother's mother, your grandmother. Okay, that's the first one. There's going to be 8 listed in this brisa. We're going to see many more. Aim imo, the aim aviv, the mother of your father's mother. Torah doesn't say you can't sleep with your father's mother. But aim aviv, because that's similar to aim imo, so they add that on. We're going to talk about gzeros, tixeros. Eishes avi aviv, your grandfather's wife, even if it's not your grandmother, your grandfather's wife. Your grandfather could have another wife. Eishes avi imo, okay? Also your grandfather on your other side, your maternal grandfather's wife. All these are prohibited by the rabbis. Eishes achiha of menaim. The Torah forbids your uncle's wife. The Torah says you can't sleep with your uncle's wife. But that uncle is an uncle that's your father's brother from their father, your father's paternal brother. Is that what you call it? Your father's paternal brother. That means that your father's brother from his father's side, at least from his father's side. That's what the Torah prohibits. The rabbis added on, your father's maternal brother's wife. Your father's maternal brother's wife. Your aunt. She's in all cases we call that aunt, right? But the Torah doesn't prohibit the wife of your mother's brother. The Torah doesn't prohibit the wife of your mother's brother. Your mother's brother's your uncle, right? So another uncle and his wife. The Torah doesn't prohibit that. The rabbis did. Because the Torah only talks about your father's brother. And that means from your father's brother if they have the same father. But your father's brother from his mother's side, or your mother's brother from her father's side, Torah doesn't prohibit those, but the rabbis did. What about your mother's maternal brother's wife? Your mother's maternal brother's wife, that is not even listed here. We're going to talk about that. Because there's no side on the father. It's not your father's brother. It's not your mother's brother from her father. Your mother's brother's wife, but where your mother and her brother are maternal, only from the mother's side. We're going to talk about that. Kalas beno, as I said before, the daughter-in-law of your son. That would be your grandson's wife. The Torah prohibits your daughter-in-law, but your daughter-in-law, that's on Kalas bito. Well, why is that also? Because of Kalas beno. Again, it's almost exera to exera, but we're going to talk about it's the same idea. Kalas beno, Kalas bito. Okay, those are 8 prohibitions. You can marry your father-in-law's wife, as long as she's not your wife's mother, right? What about your stepson's wife? Your stepson's wife, you can marry her. But you can't marry your stepson's daughter. Now, your stepson's daughter, how is he your stepson? Because you're married to the mother. Well, he is the stepson. That means he's your wife's son. Your wife's son's daughter, the Torah prohibits. Yes, ishto. Correct. Because why? Because you're married to the grandmother. You can't marry a grandmother and her daughter and her granddaughter, whether it's a Torah prohibits that. So interesting thing. Also, your stepson can marry your wife. I mean, after you're dead or you divorced her, right? Your stepson can marry her. Your stepson can marry your daughter if they're not really related, if they're not blood relatives. Listen to this. The wife of your stepson, which you said before, you can marry the Eishes Churgo, you're mutter to marry her. You're allowed to marry your stepson's wife. Stepson divorces her, you can marry her. Now you can't marry your stepson's daughter. Why? Because your stepson's daughter is your wife's granddaughter. So Eishes Churgo Omer, so the wife of your stepson, so to speak, can say, Omer can tell you, I can marry you. Ubita yourself, but you can't marry my daughter. I can marry you, but you can't marry my daughter. You hear this? I can marry you because I'm your stepson's wife, but you can't marry my daughter because my daughter is your wife's granddaughter, right? So that's an interesting, like case, right? Bas chorgo says Gemara. What do you mean bas chorgo is a doraisa? What are you adding on here? Asur bas chorgo. You can't marry bas chorgo. The daughter of your stepson, that's your wife's granddaughter. So that's a doraisa. What are you mixing in here for? You can't take a woman. You can't take a woman and her daughter, and you can't marry also her daughter's daughter or her son's daughter. Well, that's what we're talking about. Your wife's son's daughter, that's your stepson's daughter. You can't take her. So that's a raisa. Because you want to give you that case where the wife of your stepson, Omer Islo, can say, I can marry you, Biti Asurlach. So you want to do that. The Biti Asurlach Midaraisa. And even though my daughter, the stepson, the stepson's wife says to this stepfather-in-law, my daughter is also Yumin Torah, because my daughter is your wife's granddaughter. Right? But the deal goes around. The Ron didn't make Sarah me. Interesting. You can marry you can marry me, but you can't marry my daughter. Okay, you can't marry my daughter Midaraisa, but me you can marry even Midarabana. So Tanaration Nami Bas Chorgo. So the also says even a Bas Chorgo is really Doraisa. Why can't you say also by the wife of your father-in-law? Listen to this: the wife of your father. We're not talking about where she's your wife's mother, right? Because if she's your wife's mother, she's also because of that, right? You can't marry a woman and her mother. But Eishes Chamav, right? Your father-in-law has another wife, right? Your father-in-law has another wife. You could marry her if your father-in-law divorces her or dies. Why can't you say, I can marry you, right? Your father-in-law's wife can marry you, but my daughter cannot. Why? Because my daughter is your wife's sister, right? My daughter is your wife's sister. So that's why you can't marry, but you can't marry my daughter. I'll tell you why. Because the first case where the stepson's wife can say, you can marry me, but you can't marry my daughter. You can marry me even Rabbana, and you can't marry the Raisa. That's fine. That's for sure. But over here, this is not definite. Why? Because over here, when she says, listen, the wife of your father-in-law could say, I can marry you, but my daughter is usher to you, right? Because my daughter's usher because you're married to her sister. You're married to her sister. So he says, you know what? That doesn't always work, because if your wife dies, you could marry the sister. You understand? So that depends on death. So therefore, it's not as definite, and therefore that case is excluded. Let's just see if there's a Rashi here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's also okay, fine. There's no Rashi in this. Okay. Now we're going to have a not obviously. So now, when I said before, listen carefully. When I said before, you can't marry your grandmother. What about your great grandmother? Your great grandmother? It goes on and on and on. When we say that, it's all the same idea. You can't marry. The second case was what? Aim of it, right? You can't marry your grandmother on your father's side. Goes on and on. Ashes Avi of it, and the wife of your grandfather, and the wife of your great grandfather. Goes on and on and on. But however, says there are 4 cases where it does that. It's only one generation. It doesn't go going on and on and on. And Rav knew about 3. He knew of 3, and the 4th one he didn't know about, but he had a Kabbalah. There were 4. What are the 3? Ashes Achia Aim Mina Av, which is one of the ones we mentioned. Your uncle. What does that mean? Your mother's paternal brother, because the Torah doesn't forbid the wife of your uncle on that side, on your mother's side at all. But the rabbi said, Ashes Achiha Mina Av, the wife of your mother's brother, your mother's paternal brother, she's forbidden. Ashes Achiha Mina Aim, or your father's maternal brother's wife, they are forbidden. Why is it only one generation? So Rashi explains, because over here there's no Erev D'Oraisa in that generation. In the case of let's say your mother's mother, so your mother's forbidden to you. So we keep on going, and that line keeps on going on. And Eshes Aviv also, you can't live with your father's wife. So your father's father's wife also you can't live on. That goes on and on. The Aim Aviv Nami Afagav, even your father's mother, even though it's not in her generation era, because your father, we're not talking about your father, we're talking about a wife, right? because it's like a emo. So it's similar to that. But in these cases that we said here, there's no tzad that's also min Torah in the previous generation, because the Torah doesn't prohibit your mother's brother's wife at all, and the Torah only prohibits your father's brother's wife in the case of a father, in the case where they're paternal, not maternal. Therefore, this is only one generation. Vikaloso, and your daughter-in-law. The Gemara is going to say, what do you mean your daughter-in-law? Your daughter-in-law is Daraisa. What do you mean? We're talking about cases which don't have a continuation. Don't go on. It's not like your great-great-grandmother and your great-great-great-great-mother. Only these cases. Enough. So what does kalosa mean? We'll see. It means kalos bito. The Gemara is going to explain that in a minute. It doesn't mean your daughter. Your daughter-in-law is also in Torah. Your daughter-in-law's got to be your son's wife, right? But we mean and we said, what about the daughter-in-law of your son? That's also one of the shnias, and that goes on. And your daughter-in-law of your son's son's son, and your daughter-in-law of your son's son, all it goes on. But the daughter-in-law of your daughter, where there's nothing in the Torah about your daughter's daughter-in-law, that's only one generation. As we'll see, kalasa really means kalos bito. Uzeir Mosef Zeir adds another one. Af Ashes Avi Imo, the wife of the father of your mother, which is not that doesn't go on there in the Torah at all. This is Af Ashes Avi Imo. Amar Nachma Yitzchak the Simon. Some of you should remember what Ziri. Ziri added on the fourth one. Rav didn't know what the fourth one was, but he didn't agree with Ziri. So he said, Amar Nachma Yitzchak the Simon is the Eloi de Rav, one above Rav. In other words, when Ziri added on one more case, he added one more generation, because Rav is only talking about uncles. You know, your mother's paternal brother's wife, or your father's maternal brother's wife, and he added on the generation above that, the grandfather's wife. That's what Ziri added on. Why did Rav consider that as another case, which only has one generation and no more? Right? Rav said no, that keeps going on. Because that if you do that, you'll come to assume that your grandfather's wife is also only one generation. But Ziri, no, you'll know the difference, because people usually go to their paternal family, to their father's fathers, they visit often, so he knows what's also what's not. But to your mothers, you're not as likely to go, and therefore you may confuse them. But Rav said there is no difference, and they're all also forever and ever. Kaloso says, what do you mean kaloso? He says here kaloso, which he said is the third one. Rav says the third one. Ziri adds on a fourth one, but he agrees that's the third one. Your daughter was a doraisa. What do you mean? We're not talking about we're talking about shnias over here, not a doraisa. Erbas kalos chalos galit. Pasuk says you can't live with your daughter-in-law. Same kalos beno means kalos beno, but kalos beno also yesh lahef sik. Whereas we're saying these are the 3 or 4 that they only for one generation, doesn't go on great, it doesn't go up the line, but this does go up the line. Kalas beno yesh lahef sik, you think it stops and doesn't. But tiny we learn kalaso erva. Daughter-in-law is an erva min Torah. Kalas beno shnia v'chein omer bibno u'ben beno ad sof kol doros. Your sons. You should live so long. Daughter-in-law is also forbidden shnias. I heard this from a great man, one who's Rabami. Strangely, he said, the kala is only also because of a kala. The astrologer said to me, you're going to be a Talmud Chacham, you're going to be a smart guy. I figured when I was young, the astrologers told me. I figured like this. If I will be a Talmud Chacham, I'll try to figure out this phrase on my own. Meaning, they asked her the kala because of the kala. What does that mean? I figure I'll figure it out. If I'm only going to be a school teacher, a Bible class teacher, I'll ask the rabbis. I'll ask the rabbis who come to shul. I'll ask them what is the meaning of lo asur kala b'nei kala. Hashda, as far as we died. Now I've learned. I went to yeshiva, and I'll say as for my own. Lo asur kalas bito ela mishum kalas beno. Why did they forbid kalas bito, which is one of the shnias that we mentioned, the daughter-in-law of your daughter, right? El mishum kalas beno, because of the daughter-in-law of your son. Even though the daughter-in-law of your son is also a drabanan. The Torah only prohibits your daughter-in-law, your son's wife. The daughter-in-law of your son is a shnia, and we asked her this because of that too. We're going to talk about that. It isn't an exera l'xera. Amalei abai l'rava. I'll give you an example of a case like this. Meaning, Some say that the pshat over here, Rashi says also, it gives an example of people, families that they knew who had both a son's daughter-in-law living with them and a daughter's daughter-in-law. So if you say that the son's daughter-in-law is forbidden, you might come, right? But the daughter's daughter-in-law is not forbidden, so you might come to marry either one of them. You might get confused. So they said, you know what? Any of your child's daughters-in-law are forbidden. That's what they mean. They says, well, also Kalasbel, El Mishum Kalasbel. I'll give you an example. Going Kalosa the Bay Bar Tsasoy. In that family, they have both a daughter's daughter-in-law and a son's daughter-in-law. They're all living in the same house. You know, the grandfather's always supporting everybody. Rav Papa Omer could go in Kalosa the Bay Rav Papa Bar Abba. Right? Another example. Rav Ashi Omer could go in Kalosa the Bay Mari Bar Isik. These are cases where they had both, not only the daughter-in-law living in the house, but the son's daughter-in-law was living there, and the daughter's daughter-in-law was living there. So if you would allow you to marry your daughter's daughter-in-law, you might come to marry your son's daughter-in-law. So therefore, one is forbidden because of the other. Boilu, here's a tough one. This I mentioned before. This is not mentioned. The wife of your mother's brother, and your mother's only related to the brother maternally. Your mother's brother, they had the same mother. And what about the wife of that? We said if there's a father involved, either your mother's paternal brother, they're related through their father's brother's wife, that's a shnia. Or your father's maternal brother's wife. Your father's paternal brother's wife is what the Torah says. Don't marry your aunt, your father's brother's wife. That's if they're brothers from the father's side. But if they're from the mother's side, the Torah doesn't prohibit, that's the shnia. What about if it's all mother? Your mother's brother, who's only your mother's brother because they have the same mother, his wife. What about that? The two we mentioned, at least there's some side of the father in there. Either he's your brother, the brother from the father's side, right? Or he's your father's brother's side. On the father's side, there's something in the father. When there's no mention here of the father at all, he's your mother's brother, and they're only related through their mother. That wife, that aunt, maybe there's not also at all. How could you say Aseret? He goof Xera. These other ones are all Xera, by not making Xera. They're all Xeras, right? So he says this is goof Xera. The mother's brother from their father is Xera. So the mother's brother from the mother, we're going to answer that too. It's going to be Xera. We don't do that. They're all like this. It doesn't mean all, but many of them I'll give an example. Imo erva, your mother's an erva, right? You can't leave. The Torah says you can't sleep with your mother. Amy moshnia. The rabbi said, okay, your grandmother too. Gazral aim aviv, even though on your father's side there's no mother involved over there, the Torah doesn't talk about it. They made Xera on your father's mother, mishum aimima, because of your mother's mother, right? Your aimima, your mother's mother, you might get confused with your mother. Right? They look alike, right? So you might come to sleep with your mother, so they made Xera. So why did they make Xera on your father's mother? Torah doesn't pick your father's mother either, because of the mother's mother. So that's Xera. Because we're all aim aviv, right? Imo erva emi moshnia, because we're all aim aviv mishum imo. The time of my cool the beimo rabasiko. They're all called grandma, right? Your mother's mother is your grandmother. So your father's mother is also your grandmother. So you might come to confuse them. Ashes aviv erva, the wife of your father. If your father's married, no matter to who he's married to, you can't sleep with her forever. Ashes aviv erva. Ashes aviv. What about your grandfather's wife? That's a shnia. You say your grandfather's wife, you shouldn't come to live with your father's wife. But Gazral ashes avi imo, even your grandfather on your mother's side, ashes avi imo, the wife of your maternal grandfather, mishum ashes avi aviv. Time and why? Because kul de be'aba rabakar. They're all called grandma. They're all called grandpa's wife, right? They're all called grandpa's wife. Ashes achia av menaav. This is your classic uncle. Your father's brother's wife is an erva. Ashes achia av mina ein shnia. If they was the uncle from the mother's side is a shnia. Because ashes achia aim minaav. If your mother's uncle, your mother's brother from their father, they have the same father. There goes on that guy's wife, that uncle's wife. Mishum ashes achia av min ha'aim. Why? Because it's similar to your father's brother's wife from the mother's side, they're all called Uncle Jack's wife, right? They're all called aunt. So the same thing. So don't tell me Gzeira, because these are all Gzeira. Make one Gzeira. We say, okay, once you make Gzeira your grandmother, make Gzeira the other grandmother, because they're all called grandma. So if you're Mata one, you'll be Mata the other one. So we're back to this question. What about your mother's brother's wife, when your mother and brother are related only through their mother, so there's no father there at all? What do you say? Tashma. Bring a proof. The Chiyasa Rav Yehuda Shila, when he came, Amr, he said in Eretz Yisrael, they said in Eretz Yisrael, Kol Shem Nekeva Erva, if this person would be a woman, she would be forbidden to you. The Zachar Gazer Olishto, because he's a man, there would gozer on his wife. If this person would be a woman, she would be forbidden to you. So if this person's a man, his wife is also also. Says Gemara, Mishum Shniya. That was a general rule. Rav V'Klalu, is that really the case? Chamoso erva, your mother-in-law is an erva. Eishes chamav muteris, but the wife of your father-in-law is mutter to you. If it's not your wife's mother, your father's wife is mutter. That's not the case, and it's simply not true. Your mother-in-law is forbidden to you, right? It's your wife's mother, but your father-in-law's wife is not forbidden to you. Bas chamoso erva, the daughter of your mother-in-law, right? That's your sister-in-law, your wife's sister, is an erva. Eishes ben chamoso muteris. What do we say? The daughter of the son of your father-in-law is mutter to you. In other words, it's not true that if she would be an erva, if she would be a keva, she's an erva. If it's a zocher, you can't marry the wife. Bas chama of erva, the daughter of your father-in-law is an erva. That's your wife's sister. Eishes ben chama of mutar. But if your father-in-law had a son, that would be your brother-in-law. His wife is mutter to you. If he dies or divorces, is mutter to you. Chargoso erva. What do we say? Chargoso. Your stepdaughter is also an erva. Eishes charga muteris. We said the wife of your stepson is mutter to you. Bas chargoso erva. The daughter of your stepson is an erva because it's your wife's granddaughter. Eishes ben charga muteris. But the wife of the son of your stepson is mutter to you. So it's not true that wherever, if it would be an akeva, she'd be also to you. So if it's a son, then its son's wife would be also. It's not the case. So therefore, what does he come to conclude? Rav Yehuda Shapiro says, listen to Klal. If it be a woman, be also to you. If it's a man, his wife is also to you. What's that? My lab Why? So it's including this case that we're questioning. Again, what's the case? Your mother's brother, where your mother and brother related only through the mother, his wife, since if it would be an akeva, you wouldn't be allowed to. In other words, you wouldn't be allowed to marry your mother's brother no matter what. Your mother's brother's forbidden to you, whether your mother's brother, your mother's sister, let's say your mother's sister would be forbidden to you in all cases, whether your mother's sister is a maternal sister or a paternal sister, and certainly both. So now that we're dealing with a man, your mother's brother, the same thing as wife would be also to you. So wait, so why is it? What's the difference between all those cases you just mentioned? You just mentioned, for example, that your mother-in-law is forbidden to you, but your father-in-law's wife is not forbidden to you, or your father-in-law's or your stepson's wife is mutter to you, and that the daughter would be usher to you. What's going on? Why is this case usher and those cases mutter? It says here. How does this aunt that we're speaking about, your mother's brother from the mother's side, his wife, how does she become usher to you? How many marriages are involved? Only one. Your mother's brother married this woman. So if one kedushin is all it took to forbid her, that's forbidden. All the other cases, it takes two marriages. Why? Because you're only married. You have to marry into the family, and then that father-in-law has to take another wife. Understand? Or right? That's what happened. There's two marriages involved, so it's a step removed. Here in this case, it's one kedushin. Your mother's brother, who was your mother's maternal brother, married this woman. So one marriage is all it took therefore it's forbidden. Hani adik trade kedushin lo mikra, but the other ones, until there's two kedushins, you have to marry into the family, not mikra. Shalchay Mishasham to Snaya. Rav Shapiro from that place asked the Kasha Rav Papi. Then Rabbeinu teaches Rabbi, Eishes Achi Avi Ha'av. What about the wife of your great uncle, your father's brother? What about that? Or Ba'achos Avi Ha'av, or the not the wife of your great uncle, but your great aunt, Achos Avi Ha'av, the sister of your grandfather Mao. Middle amount to erba, since below them there is an erba, the level below is an erba. Eishes Achi Ha'av. That's your not your great. These places are both great aunts, right? Your great aunts, either your great uncle's wife or your great aunt, but the level below aunt is also, since Balamata Erba Lamalanami goes Rabbi, also Xer there too. In other words, there are these additional erbas. We mentioned 8 in the first brisa. What about this? And we mentioned the 9th one of the mother's maternal brother, right? From the mother's maternal brother's wife. That's a 9th one. But we had 8 in the brisa and 1 more here. What about these 2? These great aunts, are they also Odilma? Oh, it's Paligrosa. There's too many generations away. Toshma, mine shnias. What are the shnias? We mentioned them. We mentioned 8 on Amalfi in the brisa. We didn't mention these. So Gemara says that's not a kasha, ton of a shire. Mentioned 8, but there could be more also. So you left up. When it's ton of a shire, there's always other things. You just don't leave out one. If you left out one, that indicates that it's excluded. So my shire to shire shnias to bear Rav Chia. Tomorrow we're going to learn Rav Chia adds on 6 more. There's 6 more. He adds on. So he left off those. So he left out this too. Amemer achshav eishachi avi avav bachos avi avav. Amemer said no. Your great aunts, whether it's your great uncle's wife or your grandfather's sister, are mutter. I saw a list of the shnias in the name of Mar Braid Ravana, Uksivan Shitzere. These are in there 16 mentioned over there. My love, how do you get 16? Timni de Masnisa. The 8 we mentioned on Amar Aleph today. We start the first brisa. V'shist be'er Rav Chia, we're going to talk about tomorrow. Rav Chia 6. That's 8 and 6 is 14. Hanachtarti must be these 2 aunts. So how can you say these 2 are permitted? He lists 16 over there, and the only way you're going to have 16 is if you include these 2 aunts, these 2 great aunts. Hashitzri. What? You think you're so right with the 16? Shipsar. What about this case that we've been dealing with now? Your mother's maternal brother's wife. That's not mentioned. That's going to make it 17. That we just posted it. But based on what was his name, Rav Yehuda Bar Shila's case of kosher, if it would be a female, it's also by a male's wife is also also. So there's 17. This is holokasha. Hanach the 2 that we're talking about, your great aunt, the Damila, they're similar. One's your great uncle's wife and one's your grandfather's sister, are similar to another. But Chadachashav considers them one. So great aunts of two kinds is considered one. So you can still have 16. So I could still have 16. So you're on. Right? And therefore I said that they're written down 16. So he says that's not a kasha on me. He says, according to you, it's to be 16. That's not a kasha because I can consider they're not 17 because you include this one, and the two aunts are considered one, so it's 16. If they would be written that to me, so would you rely on it? He didn't sign it. It was said in his name that there's 16, but he didn't sign it. He didn't sign on it, and therefore I don't consider that authoritative. So therefore, we have 8, and we're going to see tomorrow if he has 6 more for a total of 14, and we really have 15 because we count the mother's maternal brother's wife as 15. And then these other 2 about the great aunts, that's debatable as we see over here whether they're included or not. All right, we'll pick them here tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.